Hi, my name is Jeff Verba, and I am here today to teach you a little bit about Unreal's front-end packaging software. This tutorial will go over specifically how to get it to work well with individual map files and having loading screens between them. Main reason for that, the team that I've been working with the Unreal editor to make a game with, we have run into issues using streaming levels and streaming merged levels for packaging where things would sometimes disappear or not line up properly. So we found that it tends to just be easier to utilize the method I'm going to go over here today and have the loading screens in. They're usually only a couple of seconds anyways. And at the end of the tutorial, I'll actually show you how to get it traded out so that it's a custom loading screen instead of just the regular Unreal Tournament one. So right now I've got Unreal Frontend open here. I'll go over a couple of the features of it really quick, and then I'll jump into how to start setting up for individual map loads. So across the top here, you've got the steps that the packaging software actually goes through while it's running. So obviously if you hit start, it's going to start going through all these steps one by one in this order. Below here, you've got some different options for how you're going to run. You can tell it that you just want it to rebuild scripts, you can tell it that you just want it to recook, you can tell it that you want it to do both, or that you only want to do some INI files that you've modified. I typically don't use this. This is the option I use the most, and I will get into that in a little bit. But going down the line here, rebuilding the scripts, good thing to have enabled. It's going to force the packaging software to make sure that all of the script files that you have for your custom game are, working before it tries to package the game and crash. So it'll spit out the errors, it'll tell you there's some errors in the files, and you'll know, okay, I gotta go look at the scripts again. The cook step, which is another one that should be enabled, is what's going to start like baking in your lighting, building some adjacency collision information on things, and just kind of simple stuff like that. It's kind of an optimization step to help cut file sizes down and just make the game run a little bit smoother, but it's always a good idea to have this going just because it's what's going to deal with your detailed lighting the most. Now the launch step, I've always got it marked to skip. You can see by having it enabled, skip for unenabled. The reason why is because this step tends to mirror what Play on PC in the Unreal editor does. It doesn't give you the true gauge for what the packaged file is going to do because it launches this before it actually builds the installer. So you're not necessarily, just because everything's working here doesn't mean everything's always working from the exe file you give someone. So I tend to skip this and just bug test off of the packaged game file, because if I'm going to give somebody an installer, I want to make sure the installer works right. So I tend to skip this and just use this, which is always a good step to have enabled because that's going to get you your .exe file to hand out to people. So these three options, I typically don't use them. As far as I know, Reboot just kind of like refreshes front end here. If I need to, I just close it and reopen it. I believe this just opens a text editor for Unreal scripts. Not sure, never used it. And then this just launches the actual Unreal editor, which again, if I need to launch it, I'll just go into my start menu and actually launch it. Over here, DM deck. This is what you're typically going to use, especially if you're making a PC game, because this is going to be the default properties for PC. This mostly, as far as I know, is related to some of the input features, but DM deck, always a good thing to have as a base. This is where you're actually going to add and remove map files. As I said earlier, this tutorial goes over loading between individual maps. So there's 10 files here because our game that we're working on has one main menu and then 9 levels after it. We've got the main menu housed in its own map file for ease. So really simple here, like we'll pull error 404 out. So if there's anything in here, you're going to want to remove it, which is just highlighting it. And if you do a shift click or a control click, typical controls like normal, just click remove. When you're adding maps to cook, the important thing to note is this is every map file currently in your map directory within the UDK build that you're running front end for. So like this is my July of 2012 build because it's what we've been using for the game. So all of these map files exist within my July 2012 build of Unreal. It's all in that map directory. So I'm going to add this one back in. And same thing here, control click, I'll highlight multiples, so will a shift click. But I'm going to put this one back in because it was missing from the list. And so I've never had to do any overrides. The order that these map files are in is irrelevant so long as your Kismet in each map is, or your script is properly telling the game what to load next. So I've never had to use any of these overrides, so I just leave them blank. This just tells me that it's going to put the packaged game file in my UDK directory. I never tell it to skip content optimizations because they're a good thing, so I don't want it to. As far as launch options, because I don't actually launch, I don't need any of this. Since all of my testing that I do occurs from a packaged game file, I don't ever mess with any of these. Now, I'm not going to run this yet because if I do, it's going to tell me that it can't because I have Unreal open. So the reason I've got Unreal open here is because I'm going to show you how to set up for a quick and easy way to get the levels just to load between each other. So what we're looking at here is the end of the level that I've got pulled up, which it's a relatively small level. That's why it only takes a few seconds for it to load. But this trigger, when the player enters it, is what's going to fire off to load the next map. And it's a very simple Kismet setup here. So let me get this in view, zoom in. So we've got it commented out, level exit. It's this trigger. When it's touched by the player, it's going to fire off this console command, which a console command can be found doing new action, misc, console command. Inside this, we're going to set the console command, because normally it'll look like this, and this will probably have a 0. So you're going to expand this. You're going to probably have to hit the green arrow to add a line. And then the actual code that we're going to use to fire off the command is just open, because that's what's going to tell it to open a map file, and then the name of the next map. So in this case, we're telling it to open map the death cube, which if I go back to front end here, you'll see the deathcube.udk is one of the maps in the packaged installer that we're making. Now, should you ever have an instance where the map that's in this does not exist in this when you're packaging the game, like you haven't added to cook, the game will crash. Like, no questions asked. When it gets to that point, it will crash because it can't find what it's looking for. So very important that these reference the real map names as they appear in here. With that, that's all you need to do to set up that in Unreal. So I'm going to go ahead and start a full rebuild and recook. The reason that I do the full rebuilds and recooks every time is because I have a tendency to rebuild the same maps often. Like, these 10 maps have been being rebuilt for at least 4 weeks now, every week. And what happens is, if you don't tell front end to like completely clean out the cooked files, it will start to just update them instead of like completely redoing them, and you can get some weird geometry and material problems as a result. So I tend to just always tell it to full rebuild and recook. I've got a few things set up to hopefully cause this to error out and show you what's going to go on, but I'm not sure. If it doesn't go through, I'll go over them either way. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. And you can see it's updating what step it's doing down here. And in a second, it will spit out at least one error. As it's going through, right now it's actually doing, it just got done doing all of the script recompilations here. And then once it got into cooking packages, we start to see these red lines. Red lines in front end mean there is an error somewhere. But in this case, the error is actually because front end parses the text strings looking for the word error. And one of our map names, as you saw up here, is actually called error 404. So every time this map name gets found, it turns the line red saying, hey, look at me, something's wrong. So a lot of these errors that it is spitting out are ones that I can ignore because they're not actually anything. It'll do the same thing with anything that has the word warning in it, except it'll be like yellowish gold instead of red. But so you can see again here, because it has the word error, came up. This is actually quite a bit ahead of me. So if you get to that point where you've been looking at things to see what's going on and you want to scroll all the way to the end, when you're over in this area with your mouse, just right click, scroll to end. It'll put you all the way at the end of the map file, and then if you don't move this anymore, it'll go back to updating where you are. You can see it's starting to scroll up as things are finishing to go through. Alright, this actually did not error out on me, which is a good thing, but I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this so that I can show you what two common problems I have found relative to getting Unreal Frontend to crash while it's building. So I'm going to close this. The first of these is that Unreal Frontend actually wants to be run with administrative rights. I have administrative rights on this computer. However, for some reason it's not defaulting to let me use them, so I just need to right click, run as administrator, and then that'll help resolve some issues, because any program that's looking to be run as an administrator, typically it's because they need administrative rights to overwrite or update certain files. In this case, because of all the cooking and recooking that we're doing, it's actually deleting out cached information when we do the clean and recook, and then reinitializing that whole process to start over and get fresh information. So it's always a good idea to run as administrator just for that. The other thing that can cause problems that I've had come up is Steam. Now, Steam actually does integrate with the Unreal Development Kit and front-end software. If you're in one of the two and your friends are online on Steam, they'll see that you're doing something in Unreal. So because of that, I tend to close it, and I've actually had it where Unreal Frontend crashes while I'm doing something, and I go, oh wait, I bet Steam's open. I come in, I close Steam, I run it again, and it goes through perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, open it again just so that it has the Steam integration cut out of it. And then I'm going to get this started again while I move on to some of the INI files that we adjust. So again, just start, full rebuild and recook. Now, that's great for just using front-end to do map files. Like if you're doing Unreal Tournament, Unreal Deathmatch, all that, that's probably about all you need to know. However, if you're getting into custom game types, you're going to need to do some INI file modification. Now you can get to these INI files, and if you've done any custom scripting already, you should know where they are by going to My Computer, your local drive where UDK was installed, your UDK directory, and then the month of UDK that you're using for this particular build. So, like I said, we've been using the July 2012 build. In UDK game, you're then going to go to config, and this is where all your INI files are housed. Now all of the updates I'm going to show you go in the default engine.ini file. This has been kind of a debate on the internet. Some people will tell you it needs to go down in UDK engine. I've heard other people say it needs to be in default engine UDK. I always use default engine. I've never had any problems. So that's what I've got open right here right now. Or actually I've got an old version from a different directory with less updates in it. So let me open up the new one here, and I'll bring them up on the screen for comparison. So, alright, so if you're getting into a custom game type, you probably want to get around that Unreal Tournament menu system from when you load a game. You know, the one that lets you pick if it's a death match, if it's a tournament match, if it's multiplayer, pick your map file, pick your map settings for score, all that kind of stuff. You're probably wanting to get around all that. Well, it's really easy to do. So when you first open this, towards the top, you'll see this URL section. Within this, you'll see map and local map. Now, these are important because this is the one from the game that I'm running and installing right now. This is the one that UDK comes default loaded with. This UDK front-end map is what's causing all of that menu structure to go into place, because it's just a scale form menu that's being called from an empty map. So if you take your first level, which in our case, it was this main menu level because we did something similar to what Unreal did and Epic did by making just an empty map that calls the actual menu files. And all you're going to do is you're going to go and you can get yourself to that directory. It's going to be in UDK game again, except it's going to be content, and then you're probably going to be in the maps directory. And in our case, it's inside its own folder down from there. So like here, I find my C3 main menu, and if I just do the rename clicking, which it's click once, wait like a second, click once again, and it'll highlight it to rename. If I highlight all that and do a Control-C to copy paste, I can then go here and just paste it over what's already there. Now, the way this is supposed to work is map is supposed to be relative to single player games and local map is supposed to be relative to networked games. I do it in both just to cover my bases. I've never had an issue with it loading the wrong map file unless I put the wrong map file in there. So that right there just bypassed you through all of the Unreal menu structure to start your game. So that whatever your game is, when it loads, it just starts with your first level. And then if you didn't know, down here under Unreal Ed.Editor Engine is where you would put any script packages that you need to load, which is actually really important when you're doing custom scripting to have this set up, because otherwise front end and the Unreal Development Kit won't actually read through them. Like, a lot of people will tell you that this needs to read plus edit or plus mod edit packages. I've always cut the mod out and it's worked perfectly. Personally, if it's me, having the word mod in there makes it seem like it's not supposed to be universal. So I just use what Unreal and Epic used and just plus edit packages. And then this is my folder name where my scripts are housed as scene development. So I went back to the UDK month directory and it's development source. And you can see my folder name is Phoenix. And then that's all it takes to get outside of that menu structure. Now, while I was going through this, front end actually came up and said this is good. So we're going to tell it to package. And then it's going to go through and actually do all of the compressing down to make the exe file. And then once that's done, it'll ask you, or actually it won't even ask you, it'll basically just tell you that it's done and you can close all this out because front end's good. So long as it comes through green, which should be any moment here. Yep, all pipeline completed successfully. This is good to close. I'm going to leave those open for a second. So once you've made a packaged file, if you come back to your UDK month directory that you did the installer through, that's where your file is going to be. So you can see we had it named as a short name test. And if I do the install on this, it'll go through and install it on my PC. Now the biggest reason that I do the package testing instead of the launch testing is because I want to know if everything actually works in this file before I hand it to somebody. So this forces me to at least relatively play through the game similar to how a new player would. And it forces me to go through the levels as they were meant to be without necessarily skipping from one to the other or doing localized testing like you might do through the editor system. So I always try to give myself, before a build's due, a couple of hours to get it built and play with it and fix any like detrimental bugs that might not have been seen because they were a broader scope bug than what was being tested for when everything was being gone through. So it can happen. It could be as simple as a map name being wrong when you're trying to load it. It's very easy to have typos and things, so always a good idea to do a full test. You know, tutorial is what we had named the game, so this will tell me it's going to launch. Now you'll see here we've got our own custom splash instead of the Unreal one. I'll show you how to get that set up next. And then this is actually going to bug out after this video because I'm waiting on an update for our scale form menu. So normally here you would see a menu system that would let us pick through and go into the different levels and everything else and get started. But for all intents and purposes that runs. So the custom splash screen that you just saw is really easy to do, and it actually really helps differentiate your game a little bit from everybody else. So all you're going to do, UDK, your UDK folder, UDK game, and there's a splash folder down here. You go into this. I always update for PC because I've never made an installer for Mac. And in here, normally this logo, obviously because it's our logo, isn't going to be in your directory. So you'll see this logo, and this will just be named Splash. What I've done here is I've renamed it splash.default, and I've called our logo Splash. If you'll see, our logo is a bitmap image that's 650 by 375, which matches the file type and size of the original Unreal Splash. This is important because what's happening here, when I renamed this something else and named this Splash with the capital S, this is now what all of the Unreal scripts in the background are going to pull to tell the installer package and tell the game when it loads to use that image instead of this one. So make sure it's the same file type, which is a bitmap, and then make sure it's the same file size, which is 650 by 375. And as long as it's named Splash, that should run perfectly. Now, that leaves one remaining feature with this system from Unreal proper that you're probably going to want to get rid of. And it's the loading screens between levels. So typically, between levels, you'll see whenever Unreal is loading something, it'll be the red screen with the Unreal Tournament guy, a map name, and some hints, and a couple of moving icons. But that's, for us, was pretty jarring from our experience. It had nothing to do with anything our game was about. So we wanted to change that. And it's actually a lot easier than you might think. So back to this UDK game directory. Instead of Splash, we're going to go to Movies. And in Movies, this file is what we're using. This won't be in your directory. But this file, this udkfrontend.udkloading.bic, is a BINC video file that's actually what's playing between those loading, or as the loading screen. It's just a video file that's really small, as you can see, that is just an image being recorded over time to play as a loading screen. So I'm not going to go over how to make BINC videos. You can look up other tutorials on that. I can tell you Adobe Premiere with some conversions can do it, but it's all you're looking to do is record an image over time and tell it to loop, depending on if, everybody's system is different. Some computers take longer to load than others. So back to the INI files, you'll see this one goes down. You got to scroll down a little bit to find this one, or you can do a Control F and you can look for this file name. But if I scroll down a little bit, and it's actually going to show up better in this one, you're going to see this full screen movie field. And you'll see startup movies and load map movies, and they're both this UDK frontend.udk loading movie. Now, this is what's being called within Unreal on the NV entry map for between levels, because if you go up over here, you'll see we left our transition map as NV entry because that's the default one with UDK. I don't need to tell UDK to cook it because it's already inherently there, and it runs. If we just change the movie that's played within NV entry, which is what we do here by changing out what this movie name is, that's all we have to do. So if I scroll down over here, you'll see we made it C3 front end instead of UDK frontend.udk loading, which matches what our movie name is called minus the .bic extension, because this particular part of the INI files does not need the file extension at the end of it. But once you trade that out, your image is now the image that's going to, or whatever you set up your video to be, is the video that's going to play between levels. I do highly suggest just making it a standard image that's captured over time, just because if you try and make it like this epic video Well, the loading screen could only be there for 2 seconds on somebody that's, running a full i7 or AMD 8-core system, compared to the guy that's running an old i3 that it might be there for 30 seconds. So you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into them missing some kind of content between maps just because they have a faster load time. So I highly suggest just a video of an image over time. Nothing fancy. But there's one other thing that we need to do here to get it fully out of the Unreal system. So that changed the video, but it didn't get rid of the Unreal Tournament hints that are on the screen during the load, or between map loads, and it didn't get rid of the map names that show up on it, which can get kind of ugly with all the underscores and everything. So what we're going to do is, if we go to this engine.engine section, which is towards the top here, right under where you edit your packages in, you'll see this game viewport client class. And this is the old directory where it's the default setting still. So it defaults to this UT game viewport client, which is a class for a game viewport within the UT game folder structure. So what we've done is, I went through and I followed this class's extension up to another class that's already built into UDK that I was able to use that takes the text out. So all I did was, once I found it, it's in the engine folder, which is why this is engine dot, because the way that this is reading out is it's the folder name, so engine dot class name, which is game viewport client, with a capital G, a capital V, and a capital C. Once you've changed out this, or I should say, once you've changed out this for this, and you've got your new video in, you now have your custom screen with no inherent text coded into it, and that can be a really good thing. Or at least, if it does have text, it won't be the default UDK. Like, if you want to go and make your own game viewport class, feel free. We didn't feel the need to for our project because of how short the loading screens were, so we just went with the one that had nothing. That's really about it. I'm not going to save any changes because I don't need to, because this all runs. So that's pretty much all there is to front end. The big takeaways are: make sure Steam's turned off when you're trying to do an installer package. Make sure you run it as an administrator, which is a right-click, run as administrator. And outside of that, if it gives you trouble, close it down, open it back up, do a full clean and recook, which again, very simple. It's just start, full rebuild and recook. Use that more often than not so that your content doesn't get messed up while it's being packaged. And then test your package, install it, run it, play with it for about an hour, see what's wrong, find the bugs, fix them, make it the best package it can be for whatever submission you've got, because you don't want to submit a bugged game every time. It's always going to have something, but you can minimize it if you play it the way that you and your team designed it to be played for other people. So hopefully this has been informative, and I'll leave some contact info below the video if you need to get a hold of me. So thanks for your time, and have a good one.